etc. So forgive me while I spiel about various different bits and pieces to let everybody come in through the virtual doors, and not least to let one of our speakers come back through on a different device. It's lovely to have you. It's nice to be here. We're delighted to be hosting this meeting again today. This is our second, I think it's fair to say, of our series of webinars for the Workforce for the Future project. So my name is Jessie Wild, and I'm going to be your chair for today, and I'm the Deputy Project Director for the Bristol Housing Festival. Just to do a little bit of admin, and I'll recap this as we go through. I'll give you all the kind of updates as we go through, but just to give you a little bit of admin, as we've got three panelists today who I will introduce in a moment, as they're speaking, if you do have questions that you want answered related to anything that they're saying, please do pop those in the chat box. We don't have a Q&A box here, but we have got a chat box, so do put it in there. Happy to have a bit of conversation going on in there. Or alternatively, at the end of the speakers, we will have an opportunity for Q&A, in which case, if you raise your virtual hand, then you'll pop to the top of my screen, and then I can ask you to unmute yourself, turn your video on, and you can ask your question directly to the panelist. After the kind of formal presentations and then Q&A, what we're going to do is have an opportunity for breakout networking rooms, and we'll talk you through how that's going to work a little bit later on, but that will be after the speakers and after the Q&A, so we're really looking forward to that. If I could just ask you during the presentations, if you can keep yourself muted just to avoid any background noise, that'd be amazing, but feel free to turn your cameras on so we can see who we're looking at and who we're presenting to, just to give us a bit of a feel and a feedback, but obviously no pressure at all. We are recording this, and it is being live streamed on YouTube. So if you don't want your face on YouTube or to be recorded, feel free to keep your camera off. Nice to see you, Mark. But yes, so feel free to kind of turn your cameras off if you're not comfortable with that. Just a little bit about the Housing Festival, in case you haven't heard. So you've got three of us from the Housing Festival on this morning. Jez Sweetland, Project Director, is going to be one of our panellists, and you've also got Jessie Carter from the Housing Festival as well here. And the Housing Festival was set up in 2018, essentially to look at how innovation in housing can be encouraged, enabled, brought forward, particularly looking at modern methods of construction. And our kind of broader aims are around actually how can you use housing as a lever, really, to look at addressing wider social issues that we're facing as cities and as a nation. If you haven't heard of us and you want to know a little bit more, please do check out our website, and I will make sure to put a link to that in the chat later on. Final thing to say from me is that this project is, this webinar rather, is part of a series of webinars and a series of site visits as well, that's part of a Workforce for the Future project, specifically designed to support SMEs to gain exposure to MMC. So MMC being modern methods of construction. And we're working with a company called YTKO and with Moby, who are helping to deliver this project. And as I said, the aim is very much to help SMEs in the built environment to bridge the skills gap between kind of traditional built housing and this modern methods of construction housing, to help future-proof the workforce. MMC really is kind of coming forward, and it is happening, and it is growing in pace and scale. And there's an opportunity here for SMEs to align with this change and actually find a bit of training that has been funded to kind of upskill themselves. So post this webinar, there will be an email that goes around with kind of various links to those funded training schemes, as well as more webinars, site visits, all sorts of different bits and pieces and ways you can get involved. So if you are an SME in the built environment and want to know more, you can follow those links. If you are working for a company that works with SMEs that you think might be interested, then feel free to pass those links on as well. Now, enough of me just sort of wittering on about all the admin. I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers this morning. This particular webinar, the purpose is really to discuss the value opportunity presented by MMC, and particularly considering the sort of social return on investment and opportunities to build green, community-driven futures, particularly in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm delighted to introduce Ellie Jenkins, who is a partner at BoKlok. We have Graham Cullerton, who is the MD of BoKlok UK. And as I mentioned earlier, we have Jez Sweetland, who is the director of Bristol Housing Festival. So I'm going to hand over to each of them for a few moments to give to give a presentation or a bit of a kind of talk about this on this topic, and then we will open up the floor for Q&A. So we will start with Ellie, move to Graham, and then on to Jez, and I will jump back in at the end of those three. So Ellie, let me hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessie. Just bear with me while I share my screen and hope it doesn't crash everything. Fantastic. Brilliant. So it's really lovely to be here with you all today. As Jessie just introduced me, my name is Ellie Jenkins. I'm a partner at a consultancy called BoKlok, where I lead on their social and environmental work. And for me, the topic today felt really pertinent, as really applying MMC to drive better outcomes is core to our focus at BoKlok. We always start by understanding what value means to a specific client or their stakeholders surrounding a project or programme, and then we look at the right MMC enablers to help them realise the outcomes that they're hoping to drive. So for us, this is what we're all about. This is what makes us really excited, and we genuinely believe that modern methods of construction can create real tangible benefits for clients. So in terms of the benefits of modern methods of construction, clients will tell us that they think modern methods of construction will limit the social value that they can create. But actually, in our experience, this is only the case when social value is viewed through the very narrowest of lenses. There are a raft of benefits, and I could spend a really long time talking you through those different benefits today. Sorry, I'm just going to check you can see my presentation screen. I'm assuming you can. Good stuff. I could spend a long time talking you through all of those benefits, but actually let's just pause for a second and recap a few of them. So we've heard a lot in the press around levelling up recently, around how we're more equitable in sharing the value of infrastructure, but more broadly the value that we have across the UK. And MMC has a huge role to play in that levelling up agenda. Then if we pause for a moment and look at the human side, we know that from a human perspective, particularly offsite and manufacturing-led approaches create better working environments with fairer conditions, more stable employment conditions, that in turn can help increase the diversity we have within the sector. And then if we pause again for a second on those natural capital benefits, we know that there is lots of evidence around there around lower embodied carbon within manufactured-led solutions, that we've got innovations around how we can reduce waste. So there are a huge amount of benefits that can be generated through modern methods of construction. This said, even at BoKlok, where our core purpose is integrating MMC, we don't always argue that MMC is a silver bullet, and there may be trade-offs. So one of the ones that clients tell us most frequently is around the use of local labour on site. So what we do is we always start by understanding what value means to a client, and then we can build on that and help them find the right MMC approaches. So in addition to being a partner at BoKlok, I am the industry lead for a project called the Value Toolkit. And if those of you that aren't familiar with the Value Toolkit, essentially it helps clients to better articulate what value means to them and then realise that value through design and delivery. So it won't be a surprise that I'm a real advocate for establishing definitions of value up front, ensuring that everyone's really clear on what we're trying to achieve. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the image on the right-hand side, it's a 4 capitals model. So the capitals approach alongside the UN SDGs is one of the most common ways that we can help clients to define what value means, either at an organisational, a programme or a project level. And from our perspective at BoKlok, we really believe that a strong definition of value up front helps to guide design and delivery and ensure that we can create the maximum impact as we move forward. So we've just talked a little bit around the need for clear definitions of value. And what we know is that the MMC supply chain are really keen to respond to clients' needs around value. So if clients can articulate what values are important to them, the MMC supply chain will act and respond. And for me, we've got a great example here because from our perspective, MMC supply chains are emerging, so they're far more agile to be able to respond to clients' value drivers than perhaps their traditional counterparts. And what we can see is that there are some great innovations taking place within MMC supply chain partners that lower embodied carbon, that minimise the waste that's created, that minimise negative community impact, but also do positive things like increase sustainable employment, increase diversity within their employment. And also more broadly, one of the points that Jessie touched on earlier is looking at that broader piece as to how it's relieving pressure on other social systems. So we think that there is real value that can be created through modern methods of construction if clients are able to really clearly define what value means to them. So if we can get that clear definition and then we can deliver those outcomes through innovation, the final point for me is ensuring that we have the data to evidence that as an MMC sector, we really are driving those better outcomes. So let's go on to talk about that a little bit more now. So it's fair to say that when we look at social value measurement, there has always been a very heavy focus on two things: local spend and local employment, delivered primarily during the construction phase. This said, that landscape is changing and it's shifted significantly in the last year. We've now got a much broader view around what social value means, and things like the levelling up agenda are supporting us with that. If we look at the map to the right-hand side here, what we've got is we've got the dark blue areas are the areas of greatest deprivation within the UK. And the burgundy areas are the areas with off-site provision. Now, for me, what this graph demonstrates is social impact in a nutshell. It means we're developing an ecosystem of off-site support where employment opportunities and economic opportunities are needed most greatly across the UK. So the landscape is certainly evolving. The other point for me that needs to shift is that we're quite often guilty of looking at the social value that's created through an infrastructure project just through the construction phase. And actually, particularly for local authorities, what we need to start doing is stop looking at infrastructure as an isolated investment. Actually, what we're doing by infrastructure is we're driving change that supports the wider system. So from a local authority perspective, if we take a housing development as an example, and we choose to use an MMC approach to deliver those assets more quickly, we're delivering more quickly and quality assets. Now, what that does is that reduces pressure on our housing waiting lists. It also means that people that were in an unstable housing situation are moved into stable housing that is really of quality, and that drives up their health and well-being as well. So what we have to do is ensure that we're looking at some of those wider benefits and acknowledging that we're incorporating that into how we term social value and how we measure the social value that's created through an MMC approach. There is a bit of a but here, and that is that social value measurement is still leaning towards a traditional approach in terms of the metrics that we have and the proxy values that we have for assessing the amount of value that's created. But organisations like BoKlok, like the Bristol Housing Festival, contractors like Kia, and providers like The Loop are looking at the metrics to ensure that we have proper metrics that enable us to properly measure the benefits generated through a modern methods of construction approach. So there's lots happening in this space, and there'll be lots that we'll be able to share with you over coming months. The final point for me, I guess, is for any organisations that are in the MMC supply chain side that are starting to think about the outcomes that they want to create. And I thought I'd finish with some top tips for how they might start to think about those. So one is understand what value-led or outcome-led delivery means. Then I'd advocate that you choose a framework that works for your organisation. That might be the 4 capitals, it might be the UN SDGs. And you review your business, services or products against that framework to understand where you as an organisation create value. Once you've done that, identify some metrics, embed your approach to measurement, and ensure that you can properly and robustly evidence how you as an organisation are creating value, and then share your performance. So hopefully we've done 2 things through that presentation. One is looking more client side as to how MMC will create value client side. And finally, we've looked at how the MMC supply chain can start to respond and articulate what value means to them a little bit more clearly. I'll hand back to Jessie now.
Wonderful. And I'm going to hand directly over to Graham.
Remembering to unmute. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, very interesting space. BoKlok for those of you who don't know, is the joint venture between Skanska and IKEA, and it's been running in the Nordics for 20 years, and it delivers all of its homes using a fully volumetric supply chain. It has its own factory in the centre of Sweden, delivering over 1,000 homes a year. And our first project in the UK started just over 12 months ago now at Airport Road in Bristol. I'm just going to try to put some very practical and real project-specific information in the room, which complements really what Ellie's just been talking about. Airport Road is 173 homes, 96 apartments, 77 houses, all constructed off-site, 95% complete by the time they hit site. Constructed in Derby, the manufacturing is done in Derby and in Estonia, which is, I'm sure, interesting for those of you with local employment in your thinking. But modern methods of construction is just purely complementary in this space. You know, in relation to social value, what we are is an accelerator. That's the way I view it. All of the things that we've talked about in relation to sustainability, carbon, sustainable communities, reduced inequalities, all of those are achievable in traditional forms of construction, but MMC does allow us to go faster. At Airport Road, we sold more affordable homes back to the council than this policy. 27 more homes sold back to the council, which is a revenue stream for Bristol Council. There's some really interesting data, I'm sure, about what they do with that money and what value that adds. But for me, it's 27 families. It's 27 families out of temporary accommodation. It's young children in those 27 families now with a stable place to live, and all of the benefits that it gives them in a better start in life, education, attainment, their impact on the social and justice systems. All these things are absolutely huge, and if you monetize it, honestly, the amount of money attached to it is eye-watering. But I don't like to go there because it kind of makes the whole situation a little bit dirty as soon as you kind of put money to it. Just think of 27 more families with a stable place for their families to live, and all of the socio-economic impacts that has. That's what I hold on to, and that's what the business hold on to. But when we started talking with the council and Bristol Housing Festival about Airport Road, we worked to the UN SDGs, and we're probably a little bit unique as a developer to even understand them. Some will tell me, but trying to work with them. And I'm not going to sit here today and say that we've got this tape. We don't. We're learning as we go. But we work to 7 of the 17 SDGs. We've got good health and well-being. We have gender equality. We have sustainable cities and communities. We have reduced inequalities, partnerships, climate action, and responsible consumption. Now, putting this really into the position of Airport Road, a very live project which you can go and drive past tomorrow. Let's just touch on some of those UN SDGs and see how Airport Road performs. I'm going to start with gender equality. Yeah. And I'm going to make some generalizations, and I'll apologize for them if they're necessary, but they are very real. In our factory in Sweden, nearly 30% of the workforce is female, working in a very tidy, well-run, sophisticated production facility, as opposed to traditional forms of construction, which would be a very unattractive, dirty building site, which isn't attractive for young people in the UK, and maybe is not attractive to all genders in the UK. UK is still very much a male-dominated traditional construction industry. So it allows us the opportunity to start to make changes, to start to make different skills. Ellie touched on it. This is a different environment where that's where the construction's happening. The construction's happening not on this site over here. It's happening in a really sophisticated facility, and the ability to train people and to train skills in that environment rather than this environment is very different. So I'll start there. I've touched on speed of improvement. Yeah. So as a comparison, there's another development very close to our scheme at Airport Road, which was 150 homes. It had no affordable content, and it was delivered in over 4 years. We're 173 homes, which will be delivered in around 18, 19 months. So we're half the time, and that means those advantages are delivered that much earlier. Now, to politicians, and I've got a few who are really listening to this, if you want to talk about levelling up, I'll have my political beliefs, but if you want to talk about levelling up, but it's basic levels, right, of improving people's lives at level. And if you want to do it at pace, go to MMC. Because if I was a politician in term for, let's say 3 to 5 years, with the current planning policy and planning processes, and everything it takes to get a project on site and then build it traditionally, I'm not being able to point at a nice big shiny building before the end of my term unless I'm using MMC. So again, it's driving. Probably got a little bit too political there, but I'll bring it back. Don't worry. So again, pace of delivery is really, really important. This is about delivering all those things, but probably delivering it in half the time. Responsible consumption. We manufacture everything in timber because it's the most sustainable building product that's out there. But the most responsible part of MMC, which I think is a game changer, and we won't see it for a few years yet because we won't have to, is the repurposing of modules at end of use. So all of the homes at Airport Road, notionally, can be deconstructed, craned off back onto a lorry, taken back into a factory, repurposed, refurbished. Technology will have moved by then, so there'll be new technology in those homes in 20, 25 years' time, and then they can get redeployed. Now, the embodied carbon attached to that in redeploying modules is huge. You've basically just doubled the lifespan of a potential home. So that's something we're working sort of real hard on at the moment. But just coming back to sort of some of the local economics of our scheme at Airport Road, 47% were sold to Bristol Council, as I've said, 27 more families. In total, 79 families into fantastic, stable, low cost of energy homes. Real contributor towards fuel poverty. The energy performance on single family homes is already close to sort of future home standard. And later this year, we hope to have our Plus Energy home on the market. And that won't be something we do, that will become our core product. We will move completely to that product as soon as it's available. 84% of the people that bought the homes at Bristol were from Bristol City postcodes, not just from Bristol Code, but Bristol City postcodes, and 97% of them were first-time buyers. So again, providing the opportunity for people to own their own home via shared ownership or help to buy, or just our policy of getting a significant portion of the homes really at a low price. I mean, the one-bedroom homes there were £150,000. You take help to buy in there, and that's somebody that's earning under £30,000 can afford to buy one. Plus those 79 families with varying incomes and varying needs that are in the affordable homes. it's in action. What we're going to be doing now is we're going to be doing a piece of work between now and when the project finishes to start to really measure against the UN Sustainable Development Goals, those 7 that I've mentioned, what the true impact is. We will be hopefully talking and working with the council to understand what that accelerated delivery did for those 79 families. Remembering that a big chunk of those would have happened anyway, because that was planning policy, but the extra 27 that we that we delivered, what is the real impact on that? Not today, but those families and their future attainment in life. And that's the thing I hold on to. We can talk about data, and I agree absolutely with Ellie. Trying to measure anything at the moment is, what's the consistent method of measuring social value? You'll find a few different ways to do that. Some great and quite granular. Some there just to paint a nice pretty picture, and we're not one to paint bright pretty pictures. We want to actually give factual data, and because that's the only way that we'll improve. So that's kind of where we are. So in summary, I think MMC in this space is absolutely will reduce fuel poverty. It does improve air quality as well. There are less vehicle movements for a development that delivers via MMC than traditional. The amount of people travelling back and forth, the amount of materials delivered back and forth. So there's less local disruption as well. Gender equality in production, I've spoken about. Responsible consumption at end of life. That's a real game changer. So yeah, that's just a very a brief explanation of where we are at Airport Road, and I hopefully we'll be doing some events later in the year, and people can come visit if you haven't already.
Thank you so much, Graham. That's great. Just before we hand over to Jez, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions for the speakers as they're kind of coming up, do put them in the chat box, and I'll kind of pull those questions together and put it to the speakers at the end after Jez has finished. But Jez, let me hand over to you. Thanks, Graham.
Yeah, thank you very much, Graham and Ellie. What I wanted to do is really just be able to respond to a little bit of those 2 presentations and bring them together. And I think it's worth saying that it's been a real joy working with BoKlok and Graham over the last few years, and we're really thrilled and proud to see that BoKlok on the Brook scheme coming forward now in what Graham says absolutely accelerated timeframe, one that the council is very, very delighted with. And it's also been a real joy to work with Ellie, and we've been looking a little bit with, again, working with Bristol City Council as one of the local authorities that was piloting the Construction Innovation Hub's Value Toolkit, because what I wanted to really do is bring together these 2 themes. Why, if you can align that outcome-led commissioning with an understanding to how to engage MMC, why is there a brighter future for our housing crisis effectively, and what do we see the opportunities are there? And I think to start with, what I want to do is just really reframe what we're talking about today. We're talking about the housing crisis, which is for us is around how do we align to the outcome led? How do we accelerate delivery? How do we ensure that as we're doing that, and we're particularly focusing on an understanding of value to deliver affordable homes, we're doing that in a sustainable way, because we can't ignore the climate and the ecological emergency. And on top of that, we have a problem with the construction skills crisis. So how do the modern methods of construction as a new emerging supply chain of homes for the UK start to actually create a new opportunity for the construction industry to create new jobs, to retrain, to recruit, and really drive that agenda as well? Because the truth is, at the moment, on the way that we currently build homes, we are not really capable of delivering those 300,000 homes a year that the UK government says that we need. So the future here isn't just about MMC as a sort of a new supply chain. It's the future where you align it with that outcome-led commissioning, which is really what Graham was talking about. So, for example, the purpose of housing is not just to build new units of homes. In actual fact, if we focus on that, I believe there's a real risk that we end up building homes that we don't really need, that they're built as an investment structure, but they're not really building the homes that our cities need. But if you align it with an understanding of that outcome-led commissioning around, how do we build homes that improve the physical and mental well-being of our populations and the physical health of our planet, you start to really drive a game-changing agenda. And modern methods of construction are important in this space. And I think it's because, for me, what we've seen is that MMC has spent a number of years now really responding to that challenge of how do you increase quality, the acceleration of delivery around ability to standardize and drive standards. And as we pivot to that manufacturing process, there is a significant opportunity. And again, organizations like BoKlok are leading on this to say, well, by working around a manufactured housing supply, actually, we can continue to drive standards. We can continue to improve our methodology. And again, that's back into the data, because without that data, you don't really drive that kind of scale of improvement. So modern methods of construction are going to be a critical piece of additional housing supply. And we are talking about additionality here. Nobody is suggesting that the current way of building homes needs to be demonized. In actual fact, right now, we need those major house builders to be cracking on with the job in hand. But we absolutely need to be recognizing that that whole supply chain needs to be pivoted to sustainability. We also have to recognize that we aren't currently able to deliver the homes that we need. And one of the things that's been really interesting working with the council over a number of years is this challenge around viability. At the moment, we have a significant problem in terms of how we really drive to get the right outcomes. And this is where the values toolkit, the Social Value Act, although it's currently immature, although it can currently be taken slightly abused, and as Graham alluded to, there's definitely a way of using that and a way to get the answers that you really wanted. But there's also a commissioning opportunity to really drive change. And one of the things we've seen with that is that if you are the council and you're looking at viability, let's take a brownfield site, a bit like BoKlok on the Brook, a difficult, complex site. There was a reason that site had sat in the local plan for a long time. It wasn't because it was a lovely greenfield. It was a difficult site that was constrained and had a huge amount of challenge. But if we can start to look at the fact that when we're looking at viability, we are not just simply saying the only thing that gets homes built is if we can repay the capital investment within 20 to 25 years, but we can take the land asset and start to talk about what are the outcomes that we need. Classic example there being, well, what's the value to us as a society if we can actually take families out of emergency accommodation, insecure accommodation, often bad quality? What's the life impact as a value to taking that family and putting them into that secure accommodation? But crucially, can we even think about that in our viability calculation? So we start to do the difficult work of saying that has an economic value that pays back into the city. That land asset has to be stewarded really responsibly. For example, can we start to think about a way that when we're building our new homes now, if we say that we are going to build at the future home standard, we know at the moment that on an MMC home, that will cost us about an additional £20,000, £30,000 per home. That sounds like a significant amount of money, but actually, if you think about the problem, if you retrofit that home later, that cost goes up. So we're talking about how you drive change now to get the outcomes that society needs. And we have to do this, not just thinking about sustainability, but in my view, thinking about the social justice agenda, because that is what's going to really drive that outcome data and the opportunities for cities to take a lead on this. So modern methods of construction offer us a window, I believe, into a new supply chain. A new supply chain that can be built around a different set of challenges, a different set of values, and a different opportunity challenge. And that disruption starts to become very effective. But what I think we have seen currently is that one of the things we've been working with the council is that to engage in a whole new supply chain has a huge level of complexity. So we often think about MMC just simply being a different way of delivering a home. And if only that were the case, that would probably be easier. But modern methods of construction ask a whole series of very complex questions around the sequencing of decision-making, around procurement, around design, around an early design freeze, meaning decisions have to be made much earlier in the process, around the warranties that give you that structural support, around the legal frameworks that ensure that the fact you've pivoted to a manufacturing supply chain mean you need different legal conditions taken into account of. And all of that ultimately is coming against a cultural challenge too. For many people that have worked in housing and have 20, 30 years of experience working in housing, this is a really challenging scenario, because what you're suddenly saying to them is that 20, 30 years has relevance, but we're going to need you to revisit some of your decisions. We're going to need you to revisit the way that you think about and assess risk. And so this cultural challenge about how we innovate together around a very clear set of objectives and a very clear set of ownership is going to be crucial to seeing MMC moving in the right direction. And ultimately, I'll close with this because I'm keen we get into a Q&A. there is a serious challenge around the way that we currently deliver homes in the UK. You know, so much of our housing supply is delivered effectively around a model of land acquisition and planning uplift. It isn't really incentivized at its core to be accelerating pace into delivery. Now, when you start to look at a manufactured supply chain, that is a different proposition. There is a sense there where if you're a manufactured housing supplier, your game, your conditionality, your ability to aggregate and drive demand and therefore manage your own supply chain is driven through the need to deliver homes. It's not going to work just on a land acquisition planning uplift methodology. Now, I think that's critical. I think that's absolutely essential to bringing a change into the way that we think about, we commission, and we deliver housing. But the game here is land. So the MMC players have invested a huge amount of capital into thinking about their supply chains, into tackling the way that they can engage in the UK market. And we've seen this not just with BoKlok, with LNG Modular, with some of these other volumetric players in the UK, even the panelized systems. There's a huge amount of investment in infrastructure that's gone into place, but it is still very young in its maturity. The ability, therefore, to work with local authorities, to work around that commissioning-led, that outcome-led approach, to really be clear what it is that we need from that supply chain, and saying to that supply chain, we will collaborate with you to achieve those ends, is going to be critical, I believe, in how we see MMC really deliver at scale and at pace to meet the challenges that we face. And I think the final thing to say with that is that that does need an element of trust. And one of the things that's been a real joy to see is the way that BoKlok and the council have worked hand in glove around a shared vision for a complex site. It doesn't mean that doesn't happen in other quarters, and it certainly doesn't mean that's going to be unique to the MMC supply chain. But I think we've seen that in a way that there was a serious amount of innovation that had to be dealt with, a serious amount of political leadership that needed to be mobilized to go first, to take that innovation risk. And ultimately, the dream for me in that is that what we start to see is that modern methods of construction are seen as a critical pathway to helping cities deliver that housing that they crucially need. Now, at the moment, there are so many question marks around, as I talked about, that sort of change in process, that it's still a big hurdle, it's still a big gap, it's still a big barrier. But the ability to now align this with the work of the value toolkit, the ability to align this around being very clear that these are the outcomes that we need to be working towards, I believe gives us a chance to move back into viability, to move away from just cost, but into longer term value, to again, start to rebuild that narrative with the wider public. So you create that trust environment that where you're able to really be honest about this is the complexity we dealt with, and this is what we're achieving. And the social value of this is also important into the SME market, because I know for a fact that the reality is that although there will be a repositioning of the way that some of this work is mobilized across the UK, we are still going to need to be really engaged in that SME market to understand how to engage, how to work with this kind of infrastructure, this technology, and how to be that available workforce on the ground, as well as that workforce locally for those factories and those other on-site, off-site manufacturing facilities. So the SME market at every level is still going to be critical to how this supply chain matures and how it is able to deliver at the pace of the scale that we need it to deliver. So there is going to be a reorganization, there is going to be a restructuring, and at the core of that, this ability to capture the data, to learn the lessons, to drive standards, to deliver better outcomes and position to that value proposition is going to be a critical piece of creating that ecosystem. So I think with Ellie today and Graham, we're seeing the alignment between here's a supply chain that is answering the questions that we need it to answer, and to align with a value proposition to, frankly, make sure that as the MMC supply chain matures, we incubate the values right at the heart of it to ensure that it delivers for the wider UK. So I think it's incredibly exciting to see BoKlok and the Brook come together. I think it's incredibly exciting to see an organisation that's prepared to do that introspection and, to be blunt, some of that honesty around this is what we've achieved so far, but this is where we need to keep going. And again, I give credit to the council here as well for Bristol to be prepared to say, look, we recognise that that pace of delivery gives us an outcome, gives us a value, gives us an opportunity of really meeting the needs of the city for those people that Graham alluded to. This is about people in housing crisis where there is a real social justice agenda that we have to fix. So I'll leave it there. But essentially, I think the alignment between the value toolkit, the value discussion, the outcome-led commissioning, and the modern methods of construction provides us with a significant opportunity that is going to move at pace over the next 3 to 5 years. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Jez. Before we move on, I just want to say thank you so much to our three panelists and their presentations. It's been fascinating to kind of get into this a little bit. So we now have an opportunity for Q&A, and there have been a couple of questions that have come through, one in the chat, and we've had some others. So I'm going to start to pull those together and put them to our panelists. If you have questions, do please put them in the Q&A in the chat box, I should say. It's not a Q&A box, it's a chat box, and I can pull those together, or feel free to raise your virtual hand so I can see that you're looking to ask a question, and then we'll invite you to kind of turn on your camera, unmute yourselves, and you can ask the question directly. But before we get into that, I just want to offer any of the panelists that have, particularly Ellie, because you went first, and then Graham, you've come after Jez, whether you have anything you want to kind of respond to what you've heard from the other panelists so far, whether there's anything you wanted to kind of come back on or pick up on before we move directly into the Q&A. So Ellie, can I come to you first? Is there anything you wanted to pick up on particularly?
So I think Graham raised a really valuable point in terms of when we look at how we talk about impact in terms of social, environmental and economic impact, there is a real balance there. So the data is integral for me, and it has to be robust. We're not talking about applying huge multipliers to get the biggest number that we can possibly get. We're talking about honestly reflecting the impact that we've had. But it has to be complemented by those stories, by the real life impact that we've had on the people, the people that we were hoping to drive. That's what social impact is all about. It's about the people that we're hoping to drive impact for. So for me, I would absolutely come back and say, yes, I think there needs to be a real balance there, that we have clear figures that evidence what we're doing, but we also have the stories of people's lives that ultimately we've had an impact on. I guess the one thing that would be really interesting for me, and maybe for others on the call, is I know BoKlok went through a process of identifying which SDGs were going to be your priority areas. And I know that's something that lots of organisations grapple with in terms of how they go through that process of working out where to focus. And I'd be really keen to understand a little bit more about how you went about that and identified those 7.
Graham, is there anything you wanted to kind of add in on that?
That's a really good question. I wish I was part of the meeting that decided on the 7, but I wasn't. But I think when you go through the SDGs, I think that the 7 come out quite quickly as to the impact that we can have. And when you go through the 7, you can basically rank them as to where we have the biggest impact. At the moment, our view is that reduced inequalities is one of the highest where we have an impact. Moving forward, we need to get into climate action. We really need to get into sustainable communities, and the responsible consumption stuff we do really, really well. So there's also some ranking of these, Ellie, of where we give the biggest bang for the buck or the biggest impact. But it was interesting, my last meeting with the mayor, he really challenged us, and he said, brilliant, Graham, when we sat down a couple of years ago and we talked about this, and you talked about the UN SDGs and he said, but now prove it. Prove you are doing what you said you would. And we've done an interim report on that, but we need to get to that level of granularity. And I agree with you, Ellie. The for me, the heart story of the impact that you have for people's real lives is massively important. But like everything, you need to back it up with data. It's really interesting working with an organisation across so many different international countries. The UK is the #1 in prove it with data. So no, I do agree with you. But yeah, so on the UN SDGs, we decided on those 7. Those are the 7 where we overlay our business. Truly, we can have most impact. And I think we're still finding our way in relation to that proving point. By the end of June, I hope I'll be working with some colleagues to really put the guts behind what Airport Road has achieved, but also what it hasn't achieved. You know, because that's where the improvement is. You know, although the energy performance of those homes is very good, it can be a damn sight better. And it was our first project, so there's a few things that we would get better the next time as well. So it'll be a very honest way of looking at it. That's what we try to do. Just be very honest and reflective in what we do. But picking up on a couple of points that Jez made, we still struggle in getting everybody to understand. Yeah, and this is politicians, this is planners, this is planning officers, this is urban designers, this is warranty providers, this is banks, this is mortgage providers. Everybody is looking at this space with one eyebrow raised, and our responsibility is to keep on delivering a higher level of quality and a higher level of performance and lower energy bills in this space. So in the end, the banks turn around and go, crikey, and MMC homes are better thing to lend against than the bricks and mortar that we've been having challenges with for the last 300 years. You know, so but it's education, and that's where Bristol Housing Festival really should be applauded by continually educating and creating the conversation. But we've got so far to go. You know, we've got a non-conformity on one of our projects because unfortunately we had to deliver a small task on site rather than in the factory. And I can't tell you how much of a challenge that caused. Just little things like that, but that's a lot wider than the specifics. But education and opportunities to talk like this are huge. And I mean, I'm just going to pick very quickly up on Mark's question as well. But absolutely, you know, that's the point. I'm not going to tell you here that this is what Airport Road has delivered. We know what we're targeting. We know how far we've got. But I'm going to, be happy to come back to via the Housing Festival once we've completed all of our evaluation and explain exactly what we've delivered and the real benefits in practical terms.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Graham. I think for those of you that haven't spotted it, Mark's question in the chat was, are we evidencing all the benefits of MMC outlined by the speakers clearly enough? Which speaks very clearly into some of the things that Ellie has been talking about. And the second part was, what can we do collectively to ensure that we sell the benefits better? And Jez, I wondered if you wanted to pick up on that second bit of the question. What can we do collectively to ensure that we sell the benefits of MMC better? I mean, I know it's something that the Bristol Housing Festival have been trying to do actually pretty much since their inception. But I wondered if you wanted to kind of address that directly.
Yeah, I think it is the challenge that as Graham alluded, I think that there is a significant education piece. We are working, I think, against a culture where change is difficult, and there's an existing market and an existing methodology that for some of that supply chain actually works quite well in terms of driving profits and driving particular set of outcomes. One of the things we're working on at the moment is called the Climate Smart City Challenge with UN Habitat and Nesta, and it's been fascinating just to give you an example of that, where we're sort of asking the questions around this value proposition, because again, it can't just be about MMC, because MMC should be the right solution because it's the right outcome, not just because you said we're going to do MMC. And I think that an example there that we've come across is particularly for cities like Bristol, where in terms of land supply, you're increasingly looking at difficult, complex sites, difficult, complex brownfield sites. And in reality, we need to develop those sites to protect the green space and the ecological value of those sites that have not been built on. But there's nothing in our viability currently or our value approach that says, well, what's the additional cost of building on that brownfield? That therefore is justifiable because you can save some of this greenfield. You can say, if every square meter of brownfield that you develop, you are actually investing in this asset, this capital asset or this ecological asset over here that you're preserving. What for? Well, for the mental, for the physical health, for the air quality. And I think this is the challenge that we face, Mark, is that MMC needs increasingly to be able to sort of go first on driving that agenda. So it's not saying, you know, blindly we're pushing MMC. It's maturing that debate around this value proposition around, well, why does it matter? Because, you know, I think for me, the danger with modern methods of construction as a supply chain is simply this, that if we're not very clear about the values that we're driving to incubate that delivery, the stuff that Graham's been talking about, MMC could just be a way of building poorer quality, cheaper homes to make more profit. You know, it could be an agnostic tool that is ripped away from us. Because, you know, the people that have the big capital to go and buy the land at scale suddenly go, well, great, we'll take this. So the educational piece is making sure that there's an understanding of iterating that process of value. The Climate Smart City Challenge, we were looking at this with the Bristol University, we were looking at this challenge around, well, okay, what is the value to society of taking a family out that emergency accommodation? And of course, academics got very excited and started sort of looking at all the kind of data sets that we could look at, or all the new data we could explore. And I'm thinking, well, this is great. This is exactly where we need to be, but that's a 10 to 15 year culture change journey. So what's step one of that journey? What's the first piece of that data that we can start to look at now that creates the context where we're prepared from a policy perspective, from an actual economic decision-making perspective, that we can build that in? Because at the moment, the danger is we can flip-flop between, wouldn't it be nice to have this over here and we get nothing done, and what we're going to do now. So I think taking schemes like BoKlok on the Brook as an example, the challenge you get is to say, this is what we've done, as Graham said, but this is the data that we're going to measure to prove, and that's going to drive further change. So we need to work collectively, both with the MMC industry, but actually, as importantly, with this value proposition to educate. And I think local authorities, and I'm going to say this, I hope fairly, have a huge responsibility in that space, because a lot of that land supply is going to come from local authorities being prepared to, in my opinion, step up and say, we need to look again at the outcomes we're going to be delivering from the stewardship of our land. And until that happens, if it is simply what's the cost return, what's the economic output, what's the land disposal that we receive, I think it's a very difficult agenda. And therefore, it's a very difficult agenda for the MMC supply chain to really lead on, because you're chasing that land at the highest capital for receipt rather than looking at those outcomes. So together, I think we need to celebrate the stories when we have them. We need to shout them from the kind of rooftops to say, look, this is a better outcome, and go again, get the data, go again. It's a 10-year, 15-year change management program, and it's going to take time, but we're on the right journey.
I think that's really interesting, Jez. And I think one of the other questions we had is around kind of the future. And obviously the title of this webinar is The Opportunity of MMC for Building a Better Future. So we're very much talking about the future and how MMC kind of plays into the future. So thinking about that sort of 10 to 15 years, and then thinking even further ahead to sort of 25, 30, 40, 50 years into the future. Actually, Graham, Ellie, Jez, what do we need to be preparing for now? What actually do you see coming ahead in the sort of 20 to 50 year time frame that actually we can be building now, that we can be putting our weight behind and getting ready for? And what are the opportunities that are coming down the road that maybe we're not even starting to talk about yet, because it's just too early? We need to start at the beginning and keep working. What are the things you're actually excited for, particularly when it comes to sort of MMC for home building and house building? What is it that you're sort of looking forward to in that kind of further time frame, sort of around the next corner, as it were? I don't know who wants to kick off with that question. Graham's looking very pensively out of the window, so I'm going to come to you first, Graham.
Yeah, I think when our business unit president spoke at the Housing Festival about 3 years ago, he basically was asked a question around what do you do with homes when they're overheating because of climate change in 30 years' time, and he gave an answer which was, I don't know, but technology and human race always evolves, and I think if you talk about those types of timeframes, Jesse, it's difficult to say. I think that the main sort of focus for MMC in the UK has to be nurture. Yeah, I'm hopeful that in 25 to 50 years' time, there's enough capacity in off-site manufacturing for residential in the UK that can deliver at least half of the homes that we need built annually. Yeah, so that'd be 150,000 homes per annum. We're a long way short of that, and I'm talking fully volumetric. I'm not talking about 2D or panelised systems. I'm talking about fully volumetric homes manufactured, and we're a long way off that. And every person that's invested in a factory, small, medium, large, needs support, needs financial support, needs understanding, and needs nurturing. Because my fear over the short term is that we're actually in for a bit of a rocky ride. Yeah, the cost of materials has cracked through the roof. Yeah, for a small organisation, that's difficult to take. For a large house builder, 10 to 15,000 homes a year, it's a pain for the shareholders, but they'll survive. But to a small operator or a medium-sized operator, that hurts massively. And the other thing is we're still learning in the UK about how you manage a supply chain like that, how you feed it, because what you need, if you're going to feed a factory, you need 30 homes to go through a factory every week, so you're at maximum capacity. You don't go through with 5 1 week, 20 the next, 30 for a couple of weeks. You need maximum capacity all the way, which means you've got to manage your supply chain. You've got to maybe amalgamate some of the supply into that, like some of the work that has been done at Weka and Osher up in the northwest. Yeah. So there's lots in that. So that's my answer, really. Let's focus and nurture our supply chain, because that's where the innovation is going to come from. That's where the game changers are. If we neglect them, they will disappear, and we'll be back to where we started.
It's a good answer, Graham. Ellie, can I come to you?
You can. It feels so far away to look sort of 25 years on. It feels like we've got such huge challenges in front of us for the next 5 to 10 years. I think there are a few things that I would like to see. So for me, there's going to be a big uplift in placemaking, and we've already started to see that coming through. But the interlink between sort of technology and data and placemaking, I think we'll see a big shift around in the next few years, and that's brilliant, because actually, if we're driving properly sustainable communities that have high levels of well-being, that's the direction that we all want to be headed in. I guess from a personal perspective, the other thing that I'd love to see change is the profile of the sector. So I would love to see greater levels of diversity across the board in our sector, because I think that is fundamental to us driving innovation that's going to drive the whole sector forward. So if I could have 2 wishes, that would be it. The other one more on a tactical level that I think we'll see, and I think MMC could be an enabler for, building on one of Graham's points earlier, is increasing levels of circularity built into our design process. So we're talking about, Graham's talking about a huge scale about being able to bring in principles of circularity for whole assets, but even at a more granular level as to how you take a kitchen module out and replace it with another kitchen module. I think we'll see lots of discussion around how we do that in the residential sector.
That one of our parents is very focused on that. So if you read up on IKEA, that's their real drive now, in taking furniture back and repurposing on completion. So you're absolutely right, Ellie. There's elements along the way that can already be done.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you, Graham. I'm aware of time. Jez, do you want to give a sort of 60-second outcome, sort of?
Yeah, just because I don't want to repeat what's been said, because I fully agree with that. I think the other thing is housing as a health intervention. I think increasingly looking at the way that we can start to look at and analyze data, that we're going to start to see. There's lots of research that's out there, but often it's disconnected back into how housing is actually commissioned, and again, that value proposition. So and 25, 30 years, I absolutely believe that, if you can evolve a whole new supply chain of manufactured housing around a different set of commissioning values, where, again, driven by value outcome and not just cost, it is believable that we can start to actually fix the housing crisis while addressing our carbon and sustainability challenges. That is absolutely possible, because my belief, and I haven't yet heard many people disagree with this, is that our housing crisis has nothing to do with our lack of land or our lack of money. It's actually the way that we are stewarding those resources around the right outcomes. So, looking that longer term out, I think we have to start from the position of it is our responsibility collectively to fix the housing crisis in a way that is addressing our climate responsibility as well. And in doing so, as you do that, of course, what you're doing is you're creating a whole new supply chain around green homes, green jobs, green infrastructure, green energy that comes together as part of that outworking.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jez. Thank you so much to Jez, Ellie and Graham for being on our panel. It's been a really interesting conversation. And we also want to thank as well those that are funding the Workforce for the Future, which is making these webinars and site visits possible. There will be a follow-up email with all the kind of links and things which kind of you can follow through to get to that funded training I was talking about, as well as more of the site visits and more of the webinars. But this is going to be kind of the end of the formal conversational bit. And now there is an opportunity for networking and breakout rooms. But so how that's going to work is we're going to open 2 breakout rooms, and you're going to have the opportunity to choose which breakout room that you join. So Graham and I will sit in one of the breakout rooms, and Jez and Ellie will go into the other breakout room. Graham, you and me will be in breakout room 1. Jez and Ellie, you will be in breakout room 2. And in a moment, everybody, you're going to have an opportunity to select which breakout room you'd like to join. So do please click on those links, and then basically you're going to have about 10 minutes before those first round of breakout rooms shut, and then we will open them again, and you'll be able to choose the other breakout room if you'd like to come and speak to the other panelists. So this is your opportunity to come ask more questions, grill things, get to know each other as well. So I'm going to hand to, well, I'm hoping that Jessie Carter, who is behind the icon of Bristol Housing Festival, will hit some buttons, and we will have an opportunity to jump in.
Yes, the rooms are open.
Wonderful.
Everyone should have an invitation.
Great. So at the bottom of your screen, you should have a button for breakout rooms, and you can select which room you would like to join. Thank you so much, everybody, and see you shortly.